We are very grateful to have two very accomplished, dedicated professionals here to help us understand these initiatives in their own fields and see how these efforts can support each other as we seek to raise generations of healthy, educated children. Before I introduce our first panelist, I'd like to thank the Office of Alumni Relations for their help in organizing this event. It was a great help. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the George Candriva Environmental Foundation for their funding to help support the Sustainability Gardens education programs, including a one-credit course we are offering this semester for our education students. It's called School Gardens as a Teaching Tool, and this panel tonight also happens to be the first meeting of our class. So theoretically, you could all be in our class. If you will permit me a little bit more of shameless promotion, any education student interested in taking this course can see Dr. Pawling after the panel to get more information. That self-promotion is done. I'd also like to acknowledge CNR's Environmental Club. WILD, Women in Lasting Defense of the Environment. The members have proven to be dedicated. They provided labor and outreach on behalf of the garden. This was our Harvest Festival in October. So I'm very grateful for all the work they put in. I'm also delighted to have the chance tonight, I wasn't sure if I would, to thank a very generous alumna, Margaret Kamaski. She just recently donated funds toward upgrading our greenhouse. And the greenhouse is going to be really, really vital to support a lot of our garden efforts. So thank you. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Roxanne Zimmer and Dr. Diane, who are my co-founders of the Sustainability Garden. It has been a lot of work. It's been a lot of fun too. You'll meet Diane when she comes up to introduce our second panelist. There's Dr. Zimmer all the way on the right, showing her students the video. Okay, enough of that. Now I'm going to, without any further ado, introduce our first panelist. And that, I'm going to bring up her talk. Pardon me a second. Dr. Diane is a CNR alum herself. She got her BS in biology in 1981, and she went on to earn her MD degree from Albany Medical College in 1985, and she completed her pediatric residency at the Boston Floating Hospital for Children in 1988. She moved to New Milford, Connecticut, and established Candlewood Valley Pediatrics with her husband. After 13 years of private practice, she left to explore how she could practice community-based pediatric medicine in a more holistic, preventive way. Through collaboration with the local hospital, school district, and other community health leaders, she helped create and implement several programs that focus on nutrition, physical activity, and the natural environment as the foundation of children's well-being. These programs include Cloud to Plate and the Walking Project, both of which have been nationally recognized. Please join me in welcoming you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I'm not a great public speaker, so bear with me. It's really an honor to be here. I can't believe I'm back. It doesn't seem like it's that long ago that I was sitting out there listening to somebody up here talk. And when I think about that, it seems like when I was over there, like it would have been an incredible journey to get to be up here. These people seem so much older and so much wiser. But I have two kind of words of advice for all you students out there. Number one, things don't happen very quickly. Things happen over a long period of time, and the way to establish your dream is to take baby steps. So one step at a time, if you have your goal and your dream, you do one thing, then another, it will happen. And the second thing is don't do it alone. When you find like-minded people, work with them. Collaboration is huge. You can accomplish amazing things with collaboration. There is an African proverb that I absolutely love, and I think is very appropriate. If you want to go fast, walk alone. If you want to go far, walk together. So take your baby steps and do it with a bunch of people. Okay. Tonight's talk is about gardens for promoting children's health and education. I'm doing the health piece. And I am a pediatrician. I practiced primary care pediatrics for 13 years, and then I decided that I really needed to take a break because I didn't like the direction that medicine was going in evaluating children, addressing their health problems. It wasn't really what I went into pediatrics for. Okay, in the 20th century, so 1900s, if we looked at what pediatrics was seeing, what pediatricians were seeing in their office, we were seeing birth defects, we were seeing a lot of infectious disease, and seeing a lot of injury. Now, pediatrics is a specialty of prevention. So the pediatric community would look at these things and say, well, how can I prevent these things? So birth defects, we established better prenatal care, better prenatal nutrition. Infectious disease, we invented vaccines and then used antibiotics to help treat infectious diseases. And injury, we established a lot of educational programs, car seats, fire safety, things like that. However, in the 21st century, a lot of the things we were seeing in our office were a lot different than that we were seeing earlier in the century. Obesity and its comorbidities like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. You know that 20% of children, school-age children, are overweight or obese. That 1/3, 1 out of 3 children born in the year 2000 or later will develop diabetes in their life, and 40% will develop cancer. We're seeing much more depression, anxiety, and attention deficit disorder. And the amount of spending on psychotropic meds, including those that address ADD, has now surpassed those medications used to treat asthma and infectious disease. And then something that I call, that's been coined, nature deficit disorder, which is that children spend much more time inside than they do outside. And then it's been proven that children who spend more time in the natural world have much better focus, have better, are happier, and actually have less disease, which we'll talk about. So, what is the solution? I mean, it's not like you can just create a vaccine or a drug to address a lot of these things. Does anybody know who this is? I love this painting. Here is a sick child, and of course the mother is next to the sick child, probably the first physician to the child. But that's Hippocrates, who, as you know, is the father of medicine. And Hippocrates had a very important quote that I think all of us need to keep. And his quote was, "Let food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be food." So really what Hippocrates knew was fundamentally that you are what you eat, and that if you can eat good food, that you would be healthy. The problem is, if I were to look back when Hippocrates was alive, this was the kind of food that I would see, that he would say, this is your medicine. But unfortunately, we don't live in 500 BC. We live now. So if somebody were to say, well, can you take a picture of today's food, this is what you would see. So here we have this beautiful, whole food, organic, because it probably didn't have any chemicals, colorful, probably picked that day, local, right from the garden. And here you have, I'm not really quite sure what. Well, how did we get from here to here? Maybe that will help us figure out what to do. Well, in the 1930s, we had our farms in our Midwest, and about a quarter of the U.S. population lived on a farm. They were family-owned, and they grew a lot of different crops: fruits, vegetables, grains, cows, horses, goats, pigs, ducks, chickens, turkeys, everything. And they grew food for the rest of the community. There were benefits of the family farm. They generated income for the family. They provided a variety of clean foods, not only to the family, but to the community, and they contributed to the local economy. But what's really interesting is what I call the hidden benefits. Things that were going on that they didn't even know that were going on. These farmers and their families exerted a lot of physical exercise, so they were physically healthy. They were outdoors, so they were being exposed to sunshine, fresh air, but also to the soil. And there's organisms in the soil that actually promote health. Studies have been found that children that were raised on farms have a much less incidence of asthma and allergies because of the organisms that are in the soil. They had a fundamental understanding of the environment, what, as far as the weather, as far as crop rotation, as far as microorganisms. There was the family connection. A lot of the kids worked on the farm, so they worked together as a family. There was that community and cultural connection. The community was in need of their fresh food. The farmer would provide that. But also cultural, meaning that certain climates promoted certain foods, and that's why certain cultures eat certain foods and other cultures might not because of where they live. But the biggest thing is it's the food connection. People knew when they served a meal what was on their plate, what food that was, where it was grown, and who grew it. That's very, very important. Okay, then came World War II, and farms were still flourishing, and now even the urban population was getting into it because you may have heard of victory gardens. Victory gardens were planted mainly in urban and suburban areas to support the war effort. They were planted in private residences and public parks, and what it did is it took the burden of the public food system off the general population because they needed it for the war effort. So people were growing their own food, felt really good about that, and as a result they were getting this fresh, wonderful food from their garden. Okay. Now, after World War II was over, there was an abundance of ammonium nitrate. Now, what's that? Well, ammonium nitrate is the key ingredient in ammunition, and it has nitrogen in it. And nitrogen is one of the key elements that's in the soil that farmers knew about and knew it was necessary for good crop propagation. Okay, well, the United States government said, oh my gosh, we have all of this excess ammonium nitrate, what are we going to do with it? Well, it has nitrogen. Why don't we spread it all over the farmland and it'll help our crops grow? So that's what they did, and that's when chemical fertilizer was born. Okay, now, if you look at the 3 ears of corn that little boy is looking at, that actually was the first beneficiary of this new chemical fertilizer. Corn has been a very important crop in the United States for a long time. It helped the colonists survive all those harsh winters. It's very adaptable. It can grow almost anywhere. Very versatile. You can use it for a lot of things. Well, the corn loved that chemical fertilizer. Loved it. And it grew in abundance. The only problem was it grew so well, all of a sudden there was more corn than the American people could eat. So now there was this overabundance of corn, and the farmers started losing money. So you know that when one population is suffering, somebody else comes in and takes advantage of the opportunity. So this is how food power shifted from the farmers to a business. Business came in and said, we'll take your extra corn away from you and pay you. What are we going to do with this corn, though, now that we have it? And this is what how processed food really started to become abundant. They started, these businesses, number one, started making other things out of corn, like corn oil, corn starch, and corn syrup, additives to processed food. They started feeding it to cattle. And you know cows are grass eaters, not grain eaters. Grass provides an incredible amount of nutrients that if the cow eats the grass, it gets assimilated into their meat, and then you have much more healthy meat. With grain-fed animals, they're not adapted to eat grain. So there was a lot of problems with that. Cows then had to be treated with antibiotics because of that. And the first animal feeding operations started to become into play. The other thing that happened was, because the farmer saw that the corn was growing so abundantly with the chemical fertilizer, they decided to try to use it on other crops. Soy, wheat, rice were the three other crops that really flourished with chemical fertilizers. So now what has happened is, so you're talking about like the 1950s, 1960s, was we had this overabundance of corn, soy, wheat, and rice at a very, very cheap price, and the fruit and vegetable farmers couldn't compete with them. So all of a sudden you saw the shifting of our farmland from all of these wonderful fruits, vegetables, and other grains to these four dominant grains. Soy not being the predominant grains in soy. So much so that to this day, 2/3 of our calories come from those four crops. So now, beautiful farm that was growing all of these diverse crops now look like this. And this is a corn factory farm. So this had a lot of consequences. Had a lot of environmental consequences, obviously. There was a loss of biodiversity, meaning there was a lot of monoculture. Farms now would only grow one crop: soybeans, corn, wheat. Not a lot of fruits and vegetables. And this is not good for the soil, not good for anybody. Also, a loss of genetic diversity. What that means is that within the species, let's say of corn or wheat, only certain varieties were grown. So that beautiful biodiversity, genetic biodiversity, was being lost. The soil was becoming depleted of their nutrients, mainly because they planted the same crops over and over again in the soil and didn't practice crop rotation. Also, the chemical fertilizer destroyed a lot of the natural nutrients in the soil. Water pollution from runoff, from chemical fertilizers and pesticides, herbicides. Air pollution, not only from the diesel engines of the big combines that were being used to harvest all this stuff, but also from the methane that was being produced by the cows that were now eating the grain. And you know that 30% of our greenhouse gases are produced by agriculture more than transportation. Most people think of climate change as being a result of a lot of our transportation issues, but 30% of it is from agriculture. And then animal welfare issues. As these animal factory operations were becoming more and more abundant, we're hearing stories of animal misuse and inappropriate slaughter and things like that. There was also, though, the health consequences now of our new food system. Okay, diminished nutrient content of the food, not only because the soil was not as rich of nutrients, but also the phytonutrient component of our fruits and vegetables, or any of the grains, is less. You know, the phytonutrients are those wonderful chemicals in fruits and vegetables that give them their vibrant color. The plant produces those as a defense mechanism against pests. Well, now, if you use pesticides and there are no pests, the plant doesn't see any use of producing those phytochemicals in the abundance that they need to. So your fruits and vegetables that are grown conventionally as opposed to organically have less nutrients in them. And you know those are very important in cancer fighting. We have decreased varieties. What's also been happening is through genetic modification, certain crops are being planted for their characteristics. and some of the heirloom crops that have been around for centuries and centuries now are being lost. Okay, we're being exposed to more toxic chemicals and potentially harmful pathogens. Toxic chemicals, obviously, the pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, but also now, because of the way the farms are, you hear stories of E. coli and salmonella. Antibiotic resistance, most of the antibiotics that's used in this country are on animals, and that is fostering resistance, resistant organisms that now, if we get them, the antibiotics don't work. But most importantly, we've lost that physical, emotional, and cultural connection with our food. You don't know where your food is coming from. You don't know the farmer that raised it, under what conditions. Sometimes you don't even know what country it comes from. Now they have the little labels, but you have no really very little connection with it. Okay, so how can we get back to eating like Hippocrates was eating? Okay, well, there's one answer, our gardens. Gardens are a great way for everybody to reconnect with their food. It's most important that we teach children about this because a lot of kids right now have no idea where their food comes from, what their food's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to even taste like. So it's very important that we expose them and educate them to really what real food is like. Now you have a beautiful sustainability garden here because you had a lot of grass that you were able to dig up and make a garden. But some of us aren't so fortunate. We might live in the middle of the city or in an apartment. But gardens aren't just have to be right on terra firma. So you can do raised beds. You can do patio pots or porch pots. And you can even be really clever. So you can really, any place that you have a little space and you have soil and you have some seeds, then you're a gardener. Okay. How does this relate to kids? Now, I see a lot of children. I've been involved in a lot of kids' programs. And it's really amazing what a garden can teach them. So you start with the planting and the planting. And how does that affect kids? What do they learn? And how does it affect their health? Well, first of all, they have to understand about their seasons and where they live in their climate. You can't grow like bananas in Connecticut. So they have to understand that. They also get the concept of local, that food can come from a couple of feet away. It doesn't have to come from like Australia or, even Florida. So they understand that concept of local, and local food is much healthier for you because it's picked much closer to the time that you're eating it. They understand what real food is because they get to actually hold it in its true form, eat it in its true form. They have direct soil contact, which again, as we said, is really important for immune stimulation and hopefully decreasing the incidence of asthma and allergies. They understand the cycle of life, and there's a great quote I'm going to show you after this slide that really defines that. They understand that food comes from seeds, and then it grows, and you pick it, and then you eat it, and then it's part of you, and it's a cycle. And the other thing is, it fosters inclusion and cooperation. You know, if you grow a garden, you need to have everybody in the team working, and there has to be that cooperation. Everybody has to pull their weight. But also, you may have kids who have special needs, language barriers, whatever. And oftentimes those kids are not included in things. So that's really important. Everybody can garden. So this quote is from a 5th grader that helped Michelle Obama put in her garden in the White House. One of the things that I want to say about being in the garden was how gentle the feeling was. It felt surprisingly natural to be there. Okay, so after the seeds are planted or the seedlings are planted, there's the tending. So the kids get physical exercise and they're weeding and watering the garden. They're outdoors, exposed to sunlight, fresh air. They have an understanding for the respect for the environment, because they understand that if the weather is such that it is a deluge and it's raining, that something might happen to their crops. They may get a better understanding for raccoons that come in and dig up their crops. So they understand that food isn't just by itself, but it's part of their whole environment. And it also gives them responsibility for something that's living. I'm sure there's some kids that never have had any responsibility for any form of life. But it also allows them to take ownership of what they're doing. It's amazing when you see kids in the garden and they've planted a pepper plant or a tomato plant. That's their tomato plant. Like that's theirs, and they're going to want those tomatoes. That's really an amazing thing. This is another quote. We learned about how worms improve the soil so that plants can grow better. We were taught to respect the little animals that live in our garden because of the important jobs they do. And I can't believe that that child would say something like that if he hadn't been into a garden or exposed to that. Harvesting, again, physical activity. It takes a lot of work to dig up those potatoes. They're outdoors. They're exposed to food diversity. And what I mean by that is, some foods are roots, some foods are flowers, some foods are leaves. So that's a great opportunity for kids to learn that foods are all different parts of the plant. But the other thing is, if you ask a child what color a pepper is, most children would say it's green or it's red. But in a garden, you can plant purple peppers, yellow peppers, orange peppers. So it exposes the child to more diversity in their food. And what a sense of pride and accomplishment when they dig up those potatoes and pick that right pepper. Preparing and cooking. Children who grow their own food in their garden are more engaged in the cooking process and in mealtime. They're more likely to try new foods, and it teaches them lifelong skills for eating well. When they are part of that whole preparation process, you're teaching them a skill that a lot of people don't know how to do. This is another 5th grade quote. You can say that I'm a pretty regular 5th grader who loves sweets, but I can also say that getting into making a garden with beautiful vegetables has made me think about the choices I have with what I eat. They've never been exposed to it. They don't even know they have a choice. Okay, eating. Better nutritional content from that food from the garden. It doesn't have to travel 1,500 miles, which is the average amount of miles the food on your plate travels to get to your meal. Because it's picked and it's eaten right away. You're usually not using chemical fertilizers either in your garden, so the nutrient content is much better. There's no additives, meaning pesticides, herbicides, genetically modified plants, or anything like that. It expands their taste. If you have a child who says, I won't eat anything green, but they pick a green bean from the garden and eat it, all of a sudden you've opened up their taste buds to a new taste, and they're more likely then to try new things. But that's huge. Kids who have gardens at home are much more likely to eat more fruits and vegetables on a daily basis. And then there's some kind of more unquantifiable things. A lot of those things that I just said are research-based, but gardens will foster family meals, because if you have stuff growing in your garden, you're not going to sit there and eat it solitary. Most of the time the family enjoys that. Children who participate in family meals 3 to 4 days a week do better in school, have less risky behaviors such as drug abuse, alcoholism, sexual promiscuity, suicide, and abnormal eating behaviors. They eat healthier as well in general. They have a sense of pride contributing to the meals of their home from their garden, or to to their schools, because there's a lot of school-based gardens. And the kids really feel wonderful about saying, I helped grow that cherry tomato that's in that salad. It fosters cultural traditions. When you're eating in the 21st century way, as we saw in that slide, there's no connection to culture there. But when you can grow your food that may be indicative of your culture or your ethnic background, that's really huge, because then you can start that whole circle about talking about your traditions and carrying on your family traditions. A lot of family traditions center around food when you think about it, holidays or celebrations. And then the last thing is it fosters community collaboration. And this goes back to what I said in the beginning. If you start a garden, it's not just going to be, let's say, you and the child, or you and your boyfriend or husband or whatever. All of a sudden, you have to talk to maybe the farmer or the person in the, in your agway or whatever you have as far as what to plant. Then you start reading, and then you start talking to neighbors. Next thing you know, they're planting a garden. Next thing you know, you're donating your food to a food bank. One of the things that I learned about community collaboration was through Clouded Plate, which is a collaboration of people who want to connect food and people and health. And this is, I'm in the middle, and then my good friend Chef Ann Gallagher is on the left, and Carol is a natural food store owner. And then there's one person who's not there who was one of the vice presidents of our hospital. And it was us that got together to figure out how can we promote this concept that the connection between people and health is your food. And we started Clouded Plate. And from the four of us sitting around a kitchen table one day, trying to brainstorm how we could do it, and we started talking about this idea with other people. We got farmers, we got the hospital, we got a local nature center, we got government officials, all on the same page. So now New Milford, Connecticut has been put on the map because of how that philosophy about healthy food has permeated the whole community. The schools, the restaurants, the hospital, some of our religious organizations. So that's really what we want. We want to see happy, healthy kids enjoying fresh food from their gardens. And I think that my colleague Sonya is going to tell you how you can do that. Thank you.
Speaker, whose name is Sonya Abbye-Taylor. And Sonya and I have known each other for 20 plus years. Sonya is currently the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Personnel in the Pawling School District of Dutchess County. And she serves in many capacities. One of them is as chair of the district's Health and Wellness Committee. Sonya, in a prior life, was a professor and chair of our education department here at the College of New Rochelle, and she hired me for my job. So we overlapped by only 1 year, and she didn't leave because I came. We moved in different directions, but we've been friends in college since then. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Sonya come back here. She has taught courses in special education and foundational courses at the College of New Rochelle. She's worked with student teachers at Manhattanville College. She's done a lot of work in education. Sonya completed her undergraduate and graduate study in speech and language development, in the study of theater, special education, and she's done degrees in ed administration as well. She has taught young students who have learning problems, emotional, developmental disabilities, children with autism, children with aphasia. She's also worked with gifted and talented students, and over the many years of her career, she's worked with preschoolers all the way up to high school and college students, and does a lot of teacher training now in her district. After she left CNR, there was a period when she worked as a consultant for corporations in developing adult ed programs, and she's also worked with an architectural firm to design educational spaces. So in the early 90s, Sonya switched direction a little bit. She moved into public school administration, first as an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction in Fallsburg, New York, on the other side of the Hudson, and then in her current position in the Pawling School District. So please join me in welcoming back Sonya Abbye-Taylor.
Switch. Absolutely. You need to have technology skills to be in education these days. Well, let me just tell you, it is just my absolute pleasure to be back here. I actually feel like an alum of the college, and what I see around me at the college these days is so extraordinary. The physical changes in the campus, the connection to health and wellness. Diane and I just went over to the cafeteria to get something to eat. Everything is labeled and everything is healthy, and it's just extraordinary. And the fact that you're doing the sustainable garden is the other piece that is absolutely wonderful. It is so important for colleges and schools to be on the same page. And my job today is a little bit easier than Dr. Isidore's, but she has truly, truly, truly set the stage for what I would like to talk to you about. So whereas much of what I'm going to say today is going to be geared to the educators in the audience, I have some nurses out there too. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. So I will talk to the bigger picture as well. So I'm starting just by, from the beginning. There we go. Pawling is a district in Dutchess County. Sounds like it's upstate New York, far away. It's about an hour away from here. All of this stuff about health and wellness came from mandates, came from not the goodness of our hearts where many of us come from, but from legislation that happened in 2006 that said we need to change what we're doing in schools. So the regulations are handed down to school districts to make significant changes. The legislation that I'm talking about came from the federal government, and it really required that we look at nutrition education, to look at physical activity, and other school-based activities designed to promote wellness. So I guess you could figure out where the garden comes in. Now, nutrition education is absolutely critical. But as educators, when we open our schools to all kids. And they come in with snacks and foods from home. What do you think we're seeing in our classrooms these days? Are we seeing the first picture that Dr. Isidore showed, or the second? We're seeing a lot of the second. So when we talk about nutrition, we're talking about doing something called changing habits. And anybody who knows, who's ever smoked, or ever tried to be on a diet, or ever tried to do something a little bit different, know that changing habits is far more difficult than starting new habits, than creating new ways of being. So with nutrition and working with young kids, we're trying to start new ways of looking at food and what they can be eating. Physical activity, we're looking at new ways of incorporating physical activity into the classrooms. Because I don't know about you, but I have a hard time sitting for a long period of time. Our kids do too. But if we can incorporate movement into the day, into the educational facets during the day, our kids will learn better. And that's incorporated into the movement into the classroom. And other school-based activities. Other school-based activities include getting kids outside, giving them opportunities to be one with the earth and to develop gardens. So in Pawling, that's one of the things that we did. Now, how do the regulations impact schools? Again, there's a mandated health and wellness policy that the Board of Education must develop. And as you learn more about education, board policy defines and describes what you do. Along with that is a mandated health and wellness committee. And it's funny, when Dr. Isidori was talking, she was saying, do it with a bunch of people. Well, you know what? Health and wellness committees make that possible. They give you groups of people who really are excited and interested to do these kinds of things. And then, of course, mandated health and wellness guidelines, which go over a whole series of things, including the nutrition, including the physical activity. And health and wellness committees really work to develop those guidelines and to make those and to promote those guidelines. There are other obviously motivating forces. Concern for healthier foods in cafeterias. I see it here. We're working on it in cafeterias throughout the country. Are looking to bring in healthier choices for kids. Concern for students to have healthier lifestyles, to address the issues of obesity and of diabetes and things that we are seeing in the schools. And when you were talking about how many kids are on medication for behavior, it's scary when we know healthy lifestyles can really impact and reduce that kind of dependency. There's also concern for students to have healthy snacks and foods. And you know what? I use the term healthy snacks. I try not to say that term, snacks, and make the snacks that we provide for kids be as appealing. And if they're healthy, they'll figure it out. And of course, there was the concern and the need for increased physical activity. So what do we do? What are we doing to address the current need? We're doing lots of parent education programs. And when you educate parents, you educate kids as well. Just recently, we had a community fest. We call it Stone Soup. And at Stone Soup, people bring in vegetables, and we put it in a pot. It's the biggest pot I've ever seen. It goes from here down to the floor, and you stir it with a paddle. And we create workshops for people to come. So we did workshops. The Health and Wellness Committee did a workshop called Don't Sit, Get Fit. And we had kids and their parents doing all sorts of incredible activities in the gym. And they got stickers for completing all the activities. And then the stickers, they were able the kids were able to bring back to the cafeterias to get a free smoothie, which is a special treat made out of fruit and ice, and it's good. But so many of the other activities that were provided for the community were related to getting people up and moving. Ballroom dancing, karate, learning to hula hoop. We have some very talented hula hoopers. And it's just amazing. But it brought the community back to do many other things. Those were not the only things. There was cupcake making there too. But it's one way to bring a community together. And then share the soup at the end with the vegetables and read the story. And if you don't know the story of the soup, you will. So it's increased activity, improving menus in the cafeteria, instructing students to understand food labels. We literally had a very special program that we were able to connect to, the Cornell Cooperative, where kids in 3rd grade were really taught to read food labels and to understand what they were eating and what's in their food. And then they were taught to do particular cooking with healthy ingredients. And then they went to teach other kids back in the schools. So they became our ambassadors of goodwill and good health. Very important. Introduction to new fruits and vegetables. Those are things that many kids are reluctant to try. Well, if they grow them themselves, they're more apt to try them. Now, creating gardens and curriculum that supports gardens. One thing that Dr. Isidori said was that sometimes things happen slowly. Pawling was incredibly lucky to get a grant that allowed us to do something quickly. Our first garden started in 2009. However, our dream for the garden was a little bit before that. And we said, we're not going to be able to have this garden for a few more years. It's going to take us time to do this. Well, it didn't. We got a grant for approximately $1,000. We didn't need all of that, but it gave us the starting point, and it got the excitement and the enthusiasm going, so that the Health and Wellness Committee said, we're starting a garden. We were able to locate a site for it right outside the art room, and to get teachers excited about what they would do in their particular segment of the garden. So in terms of the total involvement, we have parents, teachers, administrators, community organizations, the garden club. Pawling High School students come down to work with the younger kids in the garden. They also are doing more work out in the community regarding a bluebird trail and things that connect them to nature. And there's this incredible interconnection between the older kids and the younger ones. And again, more community members who are just coming out. How does the edible garden connect to the curriculum? Our first year, the teachers chose what they wanted to do and connected it back to their curriculum. So the kindergarten kids who go out in September to the pumpkin patches, they grew pumpkins and squashes and watermelons. And if you ever see a kindergarten kid looking at a watermelon that's as big as they are, it's the most amazing thing in the world. So kindergarten grew the pumpkin patch with melons and watermelons. First grade, who studied the life cycle of seeds and sprouting. They worked to start seeds inside and then outside. We have apple trees and a strawberry patch for second grade. There's a butterfly garden. The third grade students study the life cycle of butterflies, and they actually let the butterflies go at some point during the school year. And fourth grade grew in connection with their Native American curriculum, they grew the three sisters, the corn, the squash, and the beans, and they grew that together because that was what the Native Americans did. Now, this year, our teachers have decided they're going to grow some of those things, but they're also going to grow cherry tomatoes, assorted carrots, sweet peas, assorted peppers, not hot, they told me, a variety of lettuce, and milkweed for the butterfly garden, and basil, cilantro, parsley, and herb for the herb garden. But what they said about why they chose this was because they wanted finger food for the kids. They wanted food that the kids could grab and eat from the garden, just rinse it off, and not have to do heavy-duty cooking. Because it connected the kids more closely to what they were eating. And so that's part of their thinking, which I just think is extraordinary. This is a map of our garden. This is behind the art room. When we talk about the curriculum, it was all interdisciplinary. The kids went out and measured their plot of land. They looked for where the sun was. They looked to see where would be the better spots. And then they looked at how we could make this aesthetically appealing so that the community would appreciate it. So if you'll notice, there's an apple tree. Right over here is the entrance to the garden, and there is a fence, and it's just beautiful, little gate that opens up. There's an apple tree in the center, and I will show you some pictures of that. But these are the drawings. We worked with a community member who owns a landscaping business who helped us to do that, who volunteered his time. And there it was, poof. We broke ground in November of 2009. And by the spring and summer, things were growing. The kids were in awe. It was an absolutely amazing experience. Okay, so what are the obstacles? I have some other pictures, but this is Chuck. Chuck was no friend of our garden. He loved it. And he found multiple ways to join our garden. And he was hungry this summer, him and his family. So we had some very interesting opportunities to work with Chuck. And finally, he was able to be moved in a friendly way. Also, I don't know if you remember, last summer had to be the driest summer ever. So we had families, kids and families out there watering this garden with contraptions, with ways to because it's spread across the whole fence of the garden and a hose system. But they were dedicated to making the garden work and to weed it and to take care of it. And so this was an entire community effort. And incredible people on this Health and Wellness Committee who put a book together that said, this is what you do if you're out in the garden, and gave the directions and the step by step by step. And it survived to the point where in the fall we had a harvest. And the harvest was vegetables of all kinds. And at the in I guess November, it was almost a year later from when we planted, we made another incredible soup with all things from the garden. And when the kids found out it was garden soup, they ate it. When they didn't think it was garden soup, no thank you, I don't want any. But when they realized it was soup that they grew, from the things they grew, they all ate it. And they loved it. So that was the overview. I'm hoping you're going to think of questions to ask. But I do want to show you some other pictures of the garden and how the kids interacted with it. This is our garden shed. This is where we keep our hoses and our tools and all the things that we need to water the garden. What that was, it used to be a clothing drop. And actually, this summer, somebody actually did drop some clothing in it. Even though it says watch them go. And we have an incredible art teacher who painted that to make it as cute as it is. Okay, this is Mr. Moravsky. It's a gentleman who was a landscaper who came to talk to the kids to get them excited about it. These are our kids. This is out in the garden and planting in the different pieces. That's the gate I was telling you about, that opens up into the garden, and this was in the very beginning. Three sisters, according to squash, apple tree. Oh, interestingly, the apple tree grows 4 different types of apples. It was propagated in a way, magic. Mr. Roski worked on it, but it grows 4 different types of apples. First harvest, first strawberries. Some of our moms, Mrs. Burkle, who made smoothies out of the strawberries that we grew. The elementary school principal. Our garden, by the way, is behind the elementary school. Tomato patch, potatoes. There's Tom. There's Tom. We served these to the kids, and it was just beautiful. They loved it. These are kids who salad didn't come easy to them. It wasn't their first choice of snack. They loved it. Pansies, we would decorate the salad with pansies. Look. So over the summer, we had multiple volunteers to maintain the garden And these are just pictures of some of them. And there's kid sign, edible garden. This is the first year. We learned how to dig that things down and down and down from the butterfly garden. We actually served fresh tomatoes and vegetables when parents came in for their open houses in September. So, and the kids could just pop some cherry tomatoes into their mouth. It was like candy to them. I still am in awe of what everybody did. So my question for you is, what does this say to you? What can you do? I know you're going out there looking for jobs at some point. What does this say to you? Any responses? The first thing I'm going to tell you, take this class. I wasn't asked to say that. As an administrator, I'm telling you, take this class. Because the skills that you will learn here, you will put on your resume. Because when people look at resumes, when I look at resumes, I say, what makes this person stand out? What do I see here that's different? And let me tell you, this is the cutting edge. Not every school has a garden. Not every school is doing what we're doing. But every school has a health and wellness committee. Every school has to have these things. And if you're going to have a committee, why not go for the top and do the best you can do? So my suggestion is, take the class, learn about all of the things that we're doing in the field, join the committees, and be the leaders in your school districts. Be the leaders. We have nurses on our health and wellness committee who they share many, many important and appropriate things with us. They're out there together. My suggestion is, take this stuff seriously and have a lot of fun with it. Anything else? Okay, that's about it.
Our speakers are now going to be up here to answer any of your questions, so please feel free.
Well, I'll start out a question. I think it's mostly directed to Sonya. How do you get everybody on board? Or is it important to get everybody on board in the school?
It is absolutely important to get everybody on board. The issue of connecting people to a project like this is critical. And the most important people, and I'm weighing my words with this one. The most important people to get on board are your teachers. Because the teachers bring the message into the classroom. The parents can want everything in the world, but if the teachers do not take ownership of this, it does not happen. And so the teachers have to truly, truly value what this is all about. And what happens is, if you have a few teachers who are excited about it, that energy grows. But it starts with the teachers. Remember, mandates are mandates, and we all have them. But mandates don't make gardens grow. People make gardens grow. People make change happen. And it happens because it comes from the heart, not because the state is saying you have to do this. And so there is a real joy behind this. And you have to have that sense of appreciation. The teachers have to share that joy, and they have to bring that joy into the classroom with the kids. And when they bring the kids out into the garden, they have to get their hands dirty the same way the kids do, and to really value it. And truthfully, research shows that when teachers learn something new and they use it with their students, and their students really get engaged with it, and the students change their behavior because of it, the teacher's behavior changes. And they do that behavior because it works. That's, I think, Tom Guskey's research. And so we learn from that. The teachers learn from the kids, and it is sustaining. So Diane, absolutely. It is truly, truly very important for the teachers to become involved in this project.
I'd like to add to that. How many students are here are health, profession majors, nurses, or okay? One of the things that I was involved in, and I want you to keep this in the back of your mind, is the walking project. When you become active in whatever community you're in, and especially if you have children who then are in the school system, the schools, at least where I come from, are clamoring for people from the outside who have passion and knowledge to come in and help the schools develop programs. So when I would go into the schools to develop the walking project, it was like, wow, we have a pediatrician who's coming into the school who really takes, wants to take a leadership role in helping our kids. And they accepted us. That was the principal, and then the teacher. And then the teachers got on board. And I want to make a comment about something else you said about the teachers. But I have to tell you, it's very rare that that happens. The walking project was presented at the American Academy of Pediatrics National Conference in San Francisco in October. The teacher who came with us to present, there was 4 of us that presented the project to this enormous auditorium of pediatricians. It was the teacher that they were asking all the questions to, because they had never seen that collaboration before. It's like they had never spoken to a teacher before. And then afterwards, they were coming to me to say, how did you get into the school? And how did you even know to open that door? So it's huge. Because when you think about it, when you're talking about children, outside the family, who's the biggest influence in those kids' lives? It's the school, and then it's the pediatrician or the healthcare professional, the school nurse. So can you imagine when they work together, what changes you can make? And then now with the walking project, which I can tell you about at some point, what you just said about the teachers. When it was first developed 5 years ago, there was a handful of teachers that were on board. We have had 17 fifth grade classes, it was only 5th graders, 17 5th grade classrooms, a couple of teachers. The other teachers went along with it because they didn't have to do a lot of work, because the outside people were doing the work, which was fine. We're now in our 5th year. We've stepped back. We give them support, whatever they need. The teachers take it now, and they run with it. And it's bursting. Now the other grades want to do it, and the other schools want to do it. So,
Something triggered another thought. One of my high school teachers, who is an active member of my Health and Wellness Committee, just got a grant through the Dairy Council, and one of the things she's doing is they're going to be getting blenders so that they can have the smoothies at the high school for the high school kids, but she's also starting a walking club. And unfortunately, there was not enough money in the grant for salary for the teacher, so she's volunteering her time to do the walking club with the kids. So one thing triggers another and another and another, and That's how it happens. But it's through that energy and excitement that it's work. Yes.
I feel like a lot of us in the education department will be getting jobs in New York City. What are your ideas to bring the garden to city schools that don't really have a lot of?
Actually, I think that's a great question, and Diane and I both, when we saw the pocket, the shoe pocket garden up on the wall, I thought that was great. Flower pots, they work. Sowing seedlings in the classrooms. I worked in Bushwick, Brooklyn. We started to do things inside them. Very, very tough. But if you have the vision and you want to do it, you can do anything. And the city needs it. Those kids need it.
You know, I spent 18 years in District 10 in the Bronx, and we were within walking distance of Botanical Gardens, and they have the Children's Adventure Garden, and they are always so happy to welcome you. You'll see the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, you have the Bronx Botanical Garden, and they would welcome us and give us little patches of grass, and whenever something new was coming out, we'd go over there, and so just looking out for the resources that are there. It's not always easy, and sometimes cities have the community gardens. It could be the back of a church or something, or an old lot that they want to clean up. So that's where the initiative and getting involved here with Dr. Kwan's project, it's a great way to showcase your interest in that in pictures and put that in your teaching portfolio, because that does make your resume come alive.
Absolutely.
There's a video called What's on Your Plate, which was, I don't know, have you heard about that? It's not like you can go out and buy it. You may have to write to them. It's an independent producers, but it takes place in New York City. About two young girls are like in 6th grade, and one mother is a film producer and one mother is like something else. So they film this whole thing, but it will give you an idea of the inside of the school system and some of the obstacles that they went through, but you might get some ideas.
Actually, New York City schools just started an initiative to create school gardens in all their schools. So they're offering schools who want to do this funding to help support these efforts.
And I want to add that they're even doing gardens on the rooftop.
Yes.
So this is a great thing in the city, believe it or not, that they are, if they have, roofs that are different levels, they're able to literally make rooftop gardens fabulous.
I was going to say, as a parent of a high schooler and a middle schooler, I know how tough it is sometimes to get these kids to eat healthy. And I'm really proud of my town because I've seen such a dramatic change in the cafeteria. Every year we go for open house, and they brought us through the cafeteria, and the meals that they're serving now, the salads and the vegetable wraps and all these different types of food, you're like, wow, this is high school? I mean, it's so different from when I was in high school that they've changed the whole curriculum. And I think it's wonderful, and I think it's a positive thing, because when one kid kind of sees another girl maybe having a salad, she might go, I'll try that salad. So it's just a positive change that I'm seeing in the cafeterias, and I just hope that it, moves on to other schools as well. So I do see a major change.
I do too.
Yeah.
And it is happening all over. The best thing is that we're getting kids to appreciate that. And remember what I said before about changing habits? By getting kids at the youngest age to be accepting of cherry tomatoes and to be eating these things because it's natural, because these are great snacks, not because they're healthy snacks, and not reaching for the chocolate. Although, by the way, we have to say everything in moderation. When we have parties in the schools, we don't say no cupcakes at all. But we really do try to provide a balance. At some point, if you take the class, I know Dr. Kwan's going to walk you through Pauling's website. On our website, there are some pictures of our Halloween snacks. You know what Halloween looks like. You have that picture of the bags of candy. Well, we try to really balance it and have snacks that are scary-looking snacks made out of very interesting types of vegetables and things. So those will be on the website for you to kind of take a walk through. But the more you can really get kids to appreciate it at that stage, the less we fight them down the road. And you're so right, those things, there's a wave, and it's coming.
One of the things we've done in our local high school was my friend Ann Gallagher, the chef. She was invited by the food service director to come in, it would have been like in November, and make butternut squash soup for the kids, and they all got samples. But what was really neat was the kitchen was open so that the kids could view her doing it. So, you know, things like that. But little things. That's all it takes, because it escalates. It just takes on a life of its own. You just have to feed it a little bit, and then it just
Water it.
it's easy.
Thank you so much for your presentations. They were very interesting. I teach at Ursuline, which is right by here, and we're trying to get a school garden started. I have two questions. First of all, do you have any advice on just what to do first? I think we're feeling a little overwhelmed, and wondering if we need one person overseeing the whole operation. I'm just not sure how to organize things. And two, I see a lot for elementary kids in the garden. Do you have any advice on how we could get the middle school, high school, because that's what we are involved, so taking it to that level?
Yes, all right, let me, first of all, is the teachers who want to try to do this?
It's a few of us as teachers and our administration, really.
Oh, if you have your administration behind you, you can do anything. So that really is the truth. So the first thing, find a location. Find a location that the kids can easily access. And then I would start by asking the kids. You engage the kids in the thought process. And I think that's your starting place. There are several movies and several YouTube videos that talk about food and how it impacts us. I think engaging them in the discussion about who they want to be, what they want to look like, how they want their health to be in the future. Says, okay, these are choices that we have. We make those choices now. Engage your kids. This is one thing we can do. And by the way, it's also what you do with the kids and then what you can give back to the community. Because you can grow a garden and you can serve it in your cafeteria, but there are people in the community that can benefit as well. And I think it connects to the character education programs that we all have too. So I think those are the conversations that can be very energizing. And then there's the issue about gardens. They're not very expensive, but they require funding. You can go out to local communities to ask for donations.
I'm going to say PTA.
PTA, yes.
This is what we did at the school that I was teaching at. And one of the teachers was very friendly with the PTA person who happened to have a husband who was someone who did gardening.
Absolutely.
And before he turned around, they had a place outside of his classroom. They started to do the garden out there, and it was just magic. Because the PTA, these are the people who have some funding. They can figure out the funding. They can go, when the school is saying, oh, our budget, PTA people can kind of say, oh, okay, here, maybe it's there, and they can turn out. It was amazing.
No, you're absolutely right. PTA is a wonderful resource. And you also want them to be connected to the garden. You want your parents connected because there is the summer. And the garden it's a very important time for the garden. You need to be out there weeding and watering and watching for Chuck. Because Chuck's got a big family.
do that, then no one feels overwhelmed. People are very happy to help. But then you've made your circle really wide, and you never know who has what connections.
Thank you.
I was wondering, like the techniques or approaches to change from unhealthy eating at snack time to healthy eating, like coming from the home, and would you like send a letter to the parents home, and what would happen if people didn't agree to
Well,
that?
I can respond to that. The health and wellness committees and the health and wellness school policy require you to create guidelines. The guidelines really spell out what parents should be sending them to school. Does it always work? Absolutely not. But it's a starting place. And in the open houses that teachers have in the beginning of the year, they set their classroom policy. And they say, these are the kinds of snacks that are allowed to be brought into the classroom. And then it's always the concept of moderation. They have birthday parties, so instead of having 5 birthday parties in a month with cupcakes, you maybe have 1 birthday party for your November birthdays or for your April birthdays, and you have a combination of sweeter snacks with other types of snacks. Trying to avoid the word healthy. Because there are all these wonderful things that the kids can be eating. And the kids start making those choices themselves. And that's the process that's the most powerful part of it. When the kids start saying, could I have a carrot, please? Could I have the celery dip and the dip, please? That's the power.
I was going to make a comment to that because when my daughter was in elementary school, we did receive a letter from the school saying that they, they wanted all, like mostly bottled. Some teachers wanted only bottled waters. Other teachers wanted 100% fruit juice. They called it healthy snacks. And I'll be honest, days that I forgot and I would throw those little chocolate muffins, my daughter would go, oh no, mommy, oh no, we got healthy snacks. So the kids remember and they remind you, and I think it's wonderful, especially if you can grab them as young as elementary school.
Absolutely.
And it also gives the teacher a chance to set the example. And certainly if you're bringing in apples or, carrots and celery or whatever, you can bring in enough so that the kids can try them. Then they may go home and encourage their parents to buy those things for them as well. But parent education is a whole nother thing. I mean, you have a captive audience in your classroom, but to educate the parents. So you use those times like open houses or curriculum night or whatever to try to tell the parents what you're doing in the schools, what you're doing in your classroom. Not to tell them what to do, but what's the school culture now? And that, I think,
Yeah, we are doing, I'll get to that question in 1 second, because as I said, educating parents is the toughest piece. On, I think, April 13th, Pawling is having a special event, and Hannaford's, the nutritionist in Hannaford's is going to be doing a tour with our kids and our parents throughout the store, helping them to read the labels and to make some particular choices, and then doing a cooking demonstration of a quick meal on the run. If any parents know what the spring is like, and how many sports kids and activities kids are involved in, cooking, it's sometimes easier to pick up a processed package of food than it is to cook something healthy. So after the tour, we're going to do a cooking demonstration of how to do quick, healthy food and show that it is also economically feasible to do that rather than to buy the processed stuff. So yes.
I was just wondering how you take into consideration food allergies, particularly since many of these kids are trying some of these foods for the first time in their natural state.
We have to be very, very careful. Usually if a kid has a food allergy, they let us know. There are forms that kids fill out at the beginning of the school year. We do have peanut allergies. We have peanut-free areas. Peanut-free classrooms, but it's very, very difficult to maintain an absolutely nut-free, peanut-free environment. But we hope they're not allergic to carrots.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's pretty unusual, you
The
know.
reason I ask is because I have a friend who has an allergy to apples, and she didn't realize it until she was older. I mean, like she was upper elementary school. So, I mean, if you're bringing in healthy snacks as a teacher, not necessarily just saying that you're growing in the garden and you're offering them to students. I was just wondering how you handle that kind of thing.
Also, most of the real significant allergies that you have to worry about are not coming from your fruits and vegetables, although strawberries sometimes can pose a problem. But like apples and peaches and things like that, those kids or adults have oral allergy syndrome, which is not a life-threatening condition. Not that you know want them to have it, but the point being that that's pretty rare. So although it is a concern, you don't have to. I think I wouldn't be too concerned.
Can I just share one story? When my son was 3 years old, he was on his way to becoming a vegetarian, and he wanted to bring carrots in for his birthday party. I wanted to bring cupcakes. Carrots.
Go Mark.
Yeah. Well, the teacher said we can't have raw carrots because of the choking concern. So the teacher brought in her juicer. We brought in piles of carrots, and we had carrot juice for the birthday party.
I wonder if you're doing research about some health-related effects in terms of reducing diabetes, type 2 diabetes, as well as the psychotropic issues of depression and ADHD.
Personally, actually, my husband and I have applied for a grant to do a within our office, starting with newborn cohorts and following them for 5 years and giving them very specific education as to how to feed them, how to feed children, educating parents about like what we've talked about, and also about environmental toxins. So we're going to be we're starting all kids starting in that are registering for kindergarten, because all kids have to have that pre-kindergarten physical. But I'm really excited about the newborn cohort, and we'll follow those kids over 5 years and see whether or not their BMIs are any different than the kids who are not in the study. So in that respect, we're doing that. I think the problem with a lot of this research is that there's so many factors. That's, it's very hard to have controls. But you have to start somewhere, and you have to do it, because the research now that's out, which is really scary, is about cancer and how much breast cancer is related to the exposures kids have as children. That to me really, really scares me, being a woman. I don't have any daughters, but I'm glad I don't, because my sons are 14 and 16, and I already would have been behind the 8 ball. So that, I think, really scary.
So you'll be including the mother and encouraging breastfeeding in
Yes.
that process?
Yeah, they have to, after every well child visit, they have to go to, we don't have a name for it, so if anybody has to like really catch a name, it's going to be a separate room within the practice, so that you have a captive audience. They have to go there, and they have to get certain specific education as far as feeding and environmental exposures, physical activity, as well as given resources to help support them. So, and it will be staffed by a full-time health professional.
Great.
That's if we get the grant.
And those who become school nurses, we are testing BMI in school these days, along with everything else that we have to do. So